Thank you. Okay, let's get going. So, as I was saying, that is the traditional way of securing what do you call a property, to acquire property, will be typically go through that process. Now, there's this concept that in recent months, especially during COVID, it kind of came out, and it's called installment sales agreement, where other people are actually starting to use that instrument to acquire properties. And recently, we've seen also property investors actually going about that and actually using that instrument to acquire property wealth. So tonight, I've got guys that have got a huge experience in this instrument. I've got Bruno Smau, an attorney that draft. He's a guy to go when it comes to property law. He's the guy who assisted a lot of property investors around this installment sales agreement, because it can be very technical. So tonight, but the most important thing, we'll try to make it more easy to understand. And then I've got a property investor. Heron, are you with me?
Yes, I'm here. I'm really, yes.
Excellent. Yes, I've got a Heron. I call him an installment sales agreement specialist, because this is one gentleman who just went and focused in installment sales agreement. He's going to tell us on why, so he's so passionate about it. And, every time I chat to him, it's like, Shilly boy, let's go into this installment sales agreement. I want to own 1,000. Here's a number. I want to own 1,000 or 2,000 properties, and I'll retire. So it would be very interesting to hear what he says. He had to say about that. And then I've got Makumalo Slindile. She's the founder of Sakizuzo Property Stokvel. Tonight, I'm saying that she's the voice of the voiceless. Why I'm saying that is because if you think about it, where typically an installment sales agreement can potentially be used is people that will typically not have access to funding, might have a bad credit record, and potentially might not being able to access that bank finance. Starting with you, okay, the housekeeping rules, you know the platform. Those who have not been with us in the previous sessions, our sessions are interactive, no presentation whatsoever. So I'm gonna ask a couple of questions, and from the get-go, you guys will be welcome to ask questions. So it's typically a group consultation. So get your questions ready. Within the next 2 minutes, I'll be opening the floor. Everyone is welcome to ask as many questions as possible. Now, Heron, are you with me, sir?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
From property investors' perspective, right? What is an installment sales agreement, and why is it making so much noise? Why is something that now everyone is speaking about it?
Yes, the property investment usually involves money. If you think about it, property investment, the very word of it means you have to take your money and go invest it somewhere with the intention of making more money. But if you keep to that thought, then you can only invest if you've got money. And with the installment sale method, you can actually become an investor without actually having money yourself or the ability to get a bond. And that's what made it so attractive to me. And that's why I just love it.
Now, I'm sure most people will be like, wow, I can actually make money without having money. But what I'm saying is, why is it an installment sales agreement so topical in the current times?
Okay, so an installment sale agreement is difficult to negotiate, but in a declining market like we are now after COVID and this next 6 years, and it's now very attractive. And the previous time that it was very attractive was post 2008 when the financial crash happened. Then a lot of people did wealth transfer by using the installment sale. And now after COVID, once the effects of COVID starts to filter through, which will happen from now until the next 6 years, you can actually use the installment sale much easier than you could use it 3-4 years ago when I started.
Okay, so let me pack it. Thank you, and then I'll come back to you, Bruno. You are muted.
Yes, I am.
Oh, there we go. Now, from attorney or from lawyer's perspective, do you want to take us maybe through the history of an installment sales agreement in layman terms?
Cool. So I'm not going to go into the legalities just yet, because I think that's something that we're going to probably do later after Heron goes into a bit more detail. But from an origin or a historical perspective, installment sale agreements have been around for ages. If I'm not mistaken, it's, I think, from about 1968, if I'm not mistaken. And what you find is it doesn't get used. And then as soon as there's a level of crisis, it becomes very popular. Then it kind of falls away again, level of crisis. And now when we start defining crisis, the interesting thing is it's crisis in property prices and also the ability to obtain finance. And those are the two paramount concerns that you tend to find that trigger the need for installment sale agreements, because as soon as people are unable to actually execute a purchase, they start trying to look for alternative ways. And this has been there since the 70s, but only kind of surfaces its head here and there. But what I do find interesting is like property investors like Huron, for instance, have taken it one step further. So instead of just using it as oh, I need to buy a home, but I can't afford it, we've now taken it as investors and gone, well, you know what, we can capitalize on this. It's not that we can't afford a bond. It's just the fact that if we get a couple of bonds, there's going to be a limitation. In this way and with this strategy, it kind of gives us a little bit more options, because now you can invest on some properties with bonds, some properties with installment sales. So strategically speaking, it's been there for ages, but its use now is actually quite novel. The way that we're applying it as investors is what kind of takes it one step further and makes it like a super provision in the Alienation of Land Act.
Okay, thank you. Let me bring Makumal. Slee, are you with us?
Hi, Shilibo. Yes, I'm here. Thank you for inviting me to attend the session once again.
You are welcome. Being the representatives of the voiceless, rather. Yeah. Tonight I'm giving you that. I'm coining the word for you. So now let's put it this way. How do you see, given the demographics of the Stokvel, the people that will typically go into Stokvel, do the contributions, right? How do you see them, without going too much into the details, how do you see them leveraging through the whole concept of an installment sales agreement? Why am I saying this? Because through researching is that typically the guys who might not have a good credit record, who might not have enough cash resources to actually go on their own, will typically form a Stokvel. Now, with this method, and what Heron is still going to go into the detail about it, how do you see that being aligned?
Shiliboy, I really think this is a real game changer. I think if I had known about something like this, you know, when I started with the whole Stokvel journey, it really would have really made such a big difference, because essentially why we're even doing a Stokvel is so that we're able to crowdfund to either, you know, buy the property together and then get the funds together and then buy the property and all of that, or because people feel that, you know, maybe some Stokvels buy property, pull money together so that they're able to raise, for example, deposits, transfer costs, or whatever the case might be. So now, if we can actually access properties without having to wait until the full capital is available, it becomes a real game changer for us, because now it actually means that we are able to quickly get access to deals, and we're able to get experience. Because now if we have to wait for 2 years, 3 years and saving money, it's earning 2% sitting in a bank somewhere based on what the current interest rates are, we're losing out on the time value of money. We're losing out on the fact that we could actually be getting out there, getting the deals, getting the experience, and now having the multiple effects. So the contributions that we would be making, instead of them sitting in a bank account somewhere, they're now actually going towards paying off the bond of the property that's already within our possession. So for me, it really, I think part of the reason why we've had a very strong Stokvel movement was because people are pushing back against the 20-year bond. They're like, why must I pay a property over 20 years? So now with something like this, it really means that you can now, just get access to property. And if you guys are a Stokvel and you're contributing 2,000 rand each, or whatever the case might be, you can quickly kill that bond off, and then you can move on to you can actually buy even multiple properties, and now you're just paying them off, and now you start actually making money a whole lot quicker than waiting until you've got your million rand and then buying this one flat in Sandton or whatever your strategy is. So I really think that that's a real game changer for Stokvels, who, because the members couldn't for whatever reason buy the properties on their own, and now there's this wonderful opportunity to do so.
Heron, you hear that there's a need, and
Yes.
This has been termed a game changer.
Yes.
But what is this
Yeah.
animal that has been termed a game changer? How does it work? How does it work?
Okay. All right. If you just think about it, when I started investing in property, the only thing that I knew was you have to save money, then you have to get your credit score good, and then you have to apply for a bond from the bank. And then if the bank approves your loan, then you can buy a property. But if the bank approves your loan and you don't have the upfront cash for the deposit and for the legal fees, then you can't buy a property. Or if you've got the upfront cash, but you don't have the bond approval from the bank, then you can't buy a property. So when I started, I didn't start because I couldn't buy property. At that stage, I was buying properties because I'm an engineer by background. So I had a good credit score, I had money, and I thought, okay, that's the way to do it. One property at a time, let's go. But it took forever to save up that money and to get the bond approval again. Because now my tenant first has to stay in the property for 6 months before the bank will recognize that income. And so it was a slow journey. And then I asked some wealthy people, and I think the reason why we're having this webinar is because everyone in this group, everyone on this webinar can go and buy a property with an installment sale within the next couple of weeks. You don't have to wait until you get bond approval. You don't have to wait until you save up all that money. And that's why this is such a hot topic right now. So to best explain it, if I have to explain this to someone that doesn't know anything about property, the best that I would, or the easiest way to explain, of course, the attorneys it's a much more complicated thing, but we don't have to do the complicated stuff. That's the attorney's job. We just have to understand the principle. And that's what I would love to share with you in a simple way, so that if you can understand it, you can also do this. If someone has a property which they bought within the last 3 years, so just think of your area where you live, the area that you know well. Now think of the complexes, these townhouse complexes that was built within the last 4 years. Most of those complexes, the developers sold it directly to the people who bought it, okay? And they sold it most likely including costs, so including legal costs and transfer fees. So they got 100% bond, including all those costs. So they maybe owe, on this stage, 600,000 Rand on a 600,000 Rand property. And so if they want to sell that property now because they lost their job during COVID, or they got a retrenchment or a salary cut or something, then to sell that property, they would need to pay the bank 600,000 Rand, the outstanding debt, plus the estate agent fees. So they have to pay 650 or 680,000. And if they don't have that, okay, now the best price that the market can offer now is perhaps 600,000. You can buy the one next door for 600,000 directly from the developer. So now this person that owes 600 and that want to sell it with an estate agent fee for 680, they can't sell this property right now. And that's pretty much the truth for any property that was bought within the last 4 years at 100% finance, which there's thousands of them right now. And those people simply cannot sell because they owe more than what the market is willing to offer. If I've got cash, I can go buy the one next door for 550. Why would I buy that one at 680? And that's the problem. But within that problem lies the opportunity. Because we in this group now that we're going to get the knowledge tonight, realizes that I can go to that seller and I can offer them to pay off that property with an installment sale, and the price that I will offer is the exact same amount that they owe on the property. So if you think about that, you're not taking over the loan stays in their name, the property stays in their name. The agreement is I'm going to pay the exact same cost that you're supposed to pay, which you can't afford anymore. I'm going to pay that. I'm going to pay that until the property is settled, and only once that outstanding bond is settled, then I'm going to take transfer of the title to my name. And there's not one of these available. There's going to be hundreds or even thousands of them available in the next 6 years. Simply because people owe this much on the property, they have to sell it. The market offers them less than what the outstanding debt is, and they can't sell the property. And every month that they can't afford that property, they're falling more and more and more behind on their debt. And this becomes a real big issue. So even the banks are now looking at how can they try to kind of encourage these people to sell it to investors like us with installment sales, because what we do is we don't go live there ourselves. We find a tenant that can cover that cost, and then we buy the property. And we don't need bond approval for this. So once I realized how powerful this can be, not only for myself, but for many other people I knew, we have to get this word out. And I'm so happy that there's more and more people now realizing the opportunity, which only comes along really in a declining market, which we are in right now. This is the biggest opportunity in the last few years. So
it's the biggest opportunity, but then the structuring of this thing is very important. I think this is where Bruno comes in, and this is my last question, because in the interest of time, I want everyone to ask questions. So if you've got a question, please raise your hand, and then I'll note you, and then you'll ask a question. Bruno, you heard how Heron had narrated the whole, how the installment sales agreement works. There's quite a lot of things that I read articles. I mean, you have to pay the seller on monthly, on installment basis. Other rumors are that you can only do that for 5 years, and there's issue of interest charges around that. Do you want to maybe tell us, in your experience, what has been the best way of structuring an installment sales agreement? And from there, I note Ntando. I'll come to you, Ntando.
Cool. So I'll obviously try, for the sake of allowing everyone to ask questions, I'll limit my answer as much as possible. But just so it's contextualized, the reality is the nature of the installment sale agreement is so vast and so dynamic that I know that Hiron can spend hours speaking about it, because he's even got a course that he offers on it. Yeah. I can spend hours speaking about the legal concept as well, because we're actually soon also going to be releasing a legal course as specifically for attorneys, in fact, trying to teach people how these things actually work. So installment sale agreements were popular, not popular, popular, not popular. So what happens in an environment like that is your case law and case law support is lacking, because now not enough of these matters have actually had to go to court. So courts haven't made decisions on it. So if there's any ambiguity in legislation, it stays ambiguous because there's been no specific decision. So for example, there's a specific provision in the Alienation of Land Act that refers to an installment sale agreement being limited to 5 years. And there's massive debate between attorneys as to whether this limits your agreement to installments over a period of 5 years, or whether this is specific to a certain type of property. And our view, without complicating the matter, is that there is no limitation of 5 years. What they're referring to is relating to properties that are not capable of being registered. It's got nothing to do with the properties that we deal with 99% of the time. So the reality is that these properties that you guys are buying, the ones that you're making offers on, the ones that have people living on it, there's no limitation. But now the limitation isn't so much on the legal side, it's on the commercial side. What seller wants to wait 20 years or 30 years? And this is where Heron's going to jump in eventually after this to kind of comment and go, well, the problem is that it's all down to negotiations. You could offer the guy 20 years of payments, but the guy might want to get out a bit sooner than that. What is feasible? How do you negotiate that? And I know that's what Heron spends a lot of time discussing, because there's tricks, there's ways of approaching it. From a legal side, so that deals with the 5-year period. That's a myth. So you don't need to worry about 5-year period. Next question comes in around interest. So now the natural perception is to say, well, I'm entering into an installment sale agreement. I've got a purchase price of, say, R1,000,000, but the seller's giving me time to pay off the R1,000,000. In exchange, the seller might want some sort of compensation for this. Let's call it interest. So the seller gets a payment of 10,000 Rand a month plus interest. Now, again, this is where legally, this is the stuff the attorneys deal with. So just to concisely explain it, first thing one needs to remember, if we're taking an amount, deferring the payment and charging interest for that deferment. So basically, we're giving a longer period, but it's coming at a cost. It's considered to be a credit agreement. If it's a credit agreement, the problem is the National Credit Act applies. And we don't really want that, because if the National Credit Act applies, you need to be registered as a credit provider. There's a whole bunch of hoops that you need to jump through as a seller. And when you go make that offer to the seller and all of a sudden it comes out that he needs to go register as a credit provider, it is not going to happen. And the reality is, and like Heron will explain, you can get into these agreements without offering interest, because the reality is a lot of times as an investor, you're actually doing the seller a favor by trying to get into an agreement where you get him out of trouble and you actually pay him over a period of time. And what you find is there is a level of interest component to it, because what you're doing is you're paying a certain amount per month, but you're also covering the bank interest. So the reality is there is a component being covered, but it's not interest to the seller where he benefits and it's a charge. It's you just covering that bond payment on the seller's behalf. So you'll see some of these agreements make reference to interest, but just be careful. If it's interest that gets paid into the seller's pocket, it's a credit agreement, you're going to get yourself into trouble. If it's interest that's being paid to cover the mortgage bond, completely different story, because then it's just linked to the varying mortgage bond rates. And as the interest goes up, your payment goes up because you need to cover the bank. That's a completely different story. You're safe there. You can pay that interest. And that's where the attorneys just need to structure it properly. Another little thing that I just want to mention is sometimes what we don't realize is, and this often happens when my client is the seller, you can also ask someone to pay occupational rent for living on the property. So not only is there a situation where installments are paid to buy the property, but if you're actually selling and the person moves in, also bear in mind that you can say, well, this goes towards the purchase price, this comes towards rent. And what I find sometimes is that that's a nice tool to use to negotiate prices, because if the seller insists that he wants a little bit more than what's due on the mortgage, you don't have to charge it as interest. It can be occupational rent if you've moved into the property or you've gotten tenants for the property that cover those sums well enough that you don't need to take cash out your pocket. So there's a couple little tricks that you can use to draft it, but those are the main things that people normally ask me about. And yeah, it takes quite a bit of time to explain. So this was the short summarized version of it.
Thank you for that. I'm going to Ntando, but then think about it. I'm paying someone every month. What happens if he dies? Am I gonna recover my money? How am I protected as the purchaser? But park that, I'm gonna ask Ntando. She raised her hand, or he raised, yeah, I don't want to say she. Hi,
yeah.
Hi, yes.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to get clarity on the Stokvel. How is the Stokvel working? And how does one get to join the Stokvel? And which Stokvels that are registered, and yeah, and how are they working?
Okay, let me take that in the interest of time. Sleep, do you mind sharing your details on a chat box, and then yeah, you can take that off line.
I'll do that. I'll drop my details so you can contact me via email. It's hello@mitsilindile.com, but I'm gonna put it on the chat line as well.
There we go. Nelson, let me come to you.
Evening. My question is more on since most sellers they're not familiar with the installment sale, then how would you go about it, about introducing the concept to the seller, more especially if now your focus is on distressed properties? Then the second question is the one that Shilly Boy actually asked on how, if you're already in the agreement, then someone passed away, then how do we deal with that?
Thank you so much, Nelson. Guys, housekeeping, please, can you mute yourself? Thank you. Can you guys please try to mute yourself if you're not talking, please? Thank you. Heron, I want to start with you because I think this is quite interesting as a property investor to say what has been, it's part of the challenges, is right. And he's right, Nelson. I mean, some sellers might not be familiar with this. How do you go about educating the sellers?
Okay, so I'm going to show you exactly what I do when I go and buy a property. Because if I can do it, you can do it. So what I actually do is I dress nicely like this with a nice shirt. I have a folder with my company name, and I've got at the back my details. Okay, and this is how I actually buy property. Now, if you can get this little 5-second tip, you can do it as well. Then inside, I've got a paper that looks like this. I call it the 3 circles. So if you just look at this, I'm going to show you exactly how I do it. I ask them, well, I first work out how much do I want to pay for this property. Now I buy it with the intention of letting it out to tenants. You might want to buy it for yourself. So you need to ask yourself, how much do you want to pay per month? Or how much can your tenant pay? Then I work out at how much do I have to buy it in order to have that cost. Then I go and I say to the seller, I will buy it for, let's say, 600,000 Rand, 600,000. How much is the outstanding debt? And the reason why I want to ask this is because I say I'm a property investor. I don't buy with bonds, I pay cash. So I just need to know how much of this money, the 600,000, do I need to pay to the bank, and how much do I need to pay to you? Then they say, oh, okay, they still owe 580,000 Rand to the bank. Then I say, okay, so of the 600,000 sale price, I must pay 580 to the bank, which means I must pay 20,000 to you. Okay, so how we're going to do this is I'm going to pay this 20,000 Rand to the attorney who's going to register this sale agreement against the title deed. As soon as that's registered, you get your 20,000 rand. And this 580,000 rand bond, which is still outstanding to the bank, I'm going to pay directly to the bank. And this property only becomes mine once I've settled that full outstanding amount. And then they're like, okay. So you're going to pay the 580 directly to the bank, and you're going to pay the 20,000 to me. I'm like, yes. And that's the end of it. Then they say, okay, deal, sold. And then I've got the property. Then I go to Bruno or to the attorney, and I say to the attorney, this was the deal. Please can you prepare the paperwork and make sure everything is in order, and then it's done. If I can do it, you can do it.
Of course. Now that's great. Bruno, now Heron comes to you with the seller, maybe might want to be a bit educated a little bit. You'll do that part. Then we ask the situation where, how do we protect ourselves as buyers? Because I think also Slindile is interested representing the buyers to say, how am I going to represent and protect? I mean, these guys are contributing money, right, Slindile? They're contributing money every month. How are they protected, these guys?
That's very important. Eh? Like, we want to know how we make sure that you pay somebody's bond and then something happens and then you don't have a bond, then you don't have a property. Like, okay, thank you very much for paying my bond. Goodbye.
And one of the being an interactive session, one of the guys on the chat room is they're asking what happens even after that they even refuse to vacate the property. It's possible. Bruno, I think I gave you enough.
Nice. Cool. So, so risk management and stuff like this is incredibly good, and that's why it's such a popular strategy. Because people think of installment sale agreements, they think of buying, I don't know, buying random furniture or whatever the case is, taking the furniture home, and it feels like it's them. And in fact, the person that sold it to you sometimes actually has to chase you to make sure they get all the money back. So purchasers have always felt very secure with installment sales, but then all of a sudden, immovable properties kick in and you go, but hold on, this involves the deeds office. And I'm not taking transfers. So what if I'm paying this guy every single month? And what if he just decides, you know what, I don't want to sell the property to you anymore. I'm going to sell it off to somebody else. What happens in situations where, for example, you're slightly late on a payment? Can he now just keep your money and sell the property to somebody else? What happens if he dies? What happens if he gets declared insolvent? And so these are all realities. And unless you've got a title deed in your hand, these feel like huge risks. Good news is that the Alienation of Land Act is quite strict on how installment sale agreements have to be dealt with. So when you're dealing with residential property, which is predominantly the ones that we actually use in these situations, especially with investments for affordability purposes, if the property is being used for residential purposes and you're buying into it, the Alienation of Land Act has certain requirements. So it starts off by defining the specific provisions that need to be in the agreement. So that's already something that you can see protects purchasers, because people cannot have terms in the agreement that are overly onerous, number one. Number two, it then says that the contract has to be registered at the deeds office. So yes, it's not exactly a title deed, but it's in the deeds office. And by being in the deeds office, if the seller ever tries to sell the property, a big red flag comes up that says, but this is registered against the property and it cannot be sold until this is deregistered. So this gives the purchaser a level of protection that the seller cannot sell the property without the purchaser knowing. The seller would have to properly cancel the transaction, which is a contractual thing. So that's not really what we're looking at here, whether there's breaches and things like that. It's a question of dishonesty, and dishonesty is covered. It's protected against, because people cannot do anything unless the purchaser actually becomes aware and can take action to protect themselves. So from the perspective of some dishonest conduct by the seller, purchaser is solid, completely covered. Second thing, death and insolvency. So with death, it's still an enforceable agreement, so there shouldn't be any issue with that. If the deceased estate is still solvent, the contract just persists, and the amount keeps getting paid over to the estate. So that's sorted out as well. Insolvency, if the seller becomes insolvent or bankrupt, that feels like a risk. That's really bad. What happens then? So in these circumstances, what actually happens is the purchaser gets first dibs. So whatever the balance of the purchase price is, the purchaser will get first dibs to cover it. If they cannot cover it, then the property may be sold to cover the debt of the estate, and the purchaser will have a preference claim against that money. But so yes, that sounds now a bit more overwhelming. Sure, if the guy becomes insolvent, now I need to run around and try and buy the property. And I normally warn people, just, you know what, there's always an exit clause. There's always a contingency plan that you need to come up with. So when you buy these properties, know that in a certain period of time, you'd be able to come up with finance, or approach someone like a JV partner that's going to be able to come up with finance. All you need to do is cover the balance of the purchase price. It can be done. In our community, we do it every day. Where if deals make sense, we raise money very, very easily for deals. If the deal makes sense, you can get into this property, you can buy it, you can pay the balance and take transfer. But your security lies in the fact that the insolvent estate cannot go off and sell it to somebody else and ignore your contract. Your contract still takes precedence. Unfortunately, everything in the contract's accelerated, so you need to move a lot quicker. Lastly, on the question of evictions, I'm not, this isn't novel, or this isn't something new to installment sale agreements. So entering into an installment sale agreement does not in itself create a bigger risk for eviction, because I've seen that happen with normal sale agreements anyway. Yes, there is a possibility that all of a sudden the seller does not want to move out. Yes, you might need to cater for some sort of eviction process in order to get the seller out. Unfortunately, that's the best answer I can give. A practical answer, you can probably tell if it's going to start being a problem. You can probably tell by the demeanor of the seller. And then remember, you're paying monthly installments. So you can also now start looking at this and trying to figure out how you're going to deal with it. Bear in mind that with most of these properties are sold on. So once you start the contract and you pay in installments, you're not going to get to the balance of the purchase price until many, many years, or unless you sell the property or you have some kind of balloon payment. At this balloon payment, this is when transfer is about to take place. So remember, the contract still provides for vacant occupation. If for some reason the person doesn't want to move out, you can use tactics like stalling the transfer so that they don't get money until they move out. And at this juncture, you're probably going to land up being able to control whether they stay in occupation or not.
Wow.
Yeah, but I think on top of that, also, if you buy the property with an installment sale and the person selling it to you doesn't want to move out, why would you pay your first installment? So they need to move out for you to start paying. So that's the benefit of an installment sale, is anytime during this installment sale agreement, if you as a buyer can't afford to pay or don't want to pay because they're still in your property, you can simply stop and then the agreement gets cancelled. So I don't see that as a problem. I've never had that as a problem. Most of the time, these people are in financial distress and they just want to move out as quick as possible. And they're actually quite happy to move out Wednesday.
Yeah, and they see you as a messiah in a way.
Yeah, yeah. So there are some cases. I think that's the context I was speaking from. There's some cases where when you buy it, you allow the person to stay on for a certain period. But Hiron is right. If your strategy is solid, you don't even need to worry about that. It's I buy, you get out, I put a 10 and 10. That's how we cover things going forward, which is probably the less riskier way of doing it.
I mean, Heron, okay, I was going to ask you a question, but I see Felicity. What's her name? Felicity, sorry. Yeah, let's go to her. Hi, Felicity.
Hi, how are you? How are you, Shilly boy?
I'm good. I'm doing well. Thank you.
I'm good. I'm just wondering, like, I'm listening, but I'm like, where are these people you're talking about? Distressed people, they need us to be their messiah. Where do you find them? Like chilling somewhere, or you see on their face? What's
I think it's quite a good question. Heron, do you want to maybe give us maybe your top? I know it's a secret, but top two way of.
Top two.
Yeah, I mean top two.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe the
If
second one
you-
is bonus.
The first method is any property that was bought within the last 4 years that got 100% bond is most likely the outstanding debt and the asking price will be the same. So those ones, you know, you can buy. So you go to property 24, just under the search bar, there's the tab that says last sold prices. So you put in the address, you check when was this property sold and for how much. So you see it was sold 2018 for 1.2 million. Then you look, what is the asking price? 1.2 million. You know you can buy that one with an installment sale. Now, the trick is to go to the seller, to explain to them what it is, because remember, the people don't know about this method. Most people don't know about this. So they will ask questions. All the questions we're asking here tonight, the seller will ask you. So you have to understand this 100%. So I actually prepared a question and answer. So I've got the question, the answer, question, answer. And I leave my option to purchase form with them when I buy the property. And then I also leave this with them in my nice folder. And I leave this on the table when I walk away. So that night, when they think about this again, they're going to ask the same question. They're going to feel overwhelmed. And then they can read the question, the answer, the question, the answer, the question, the answer. And if they don't have this, 99% of people don't, they will phone you tomorrow and say, look, I'm not sure. Sorry. But if you leave this with them, and then right at the end, I put the attorney's details. So if they don't trust me, they can phone the attorney and they can ask him. If you don't leave this with them, most likely they're going to phone the estate agent friend, and the estate agent friend is going to say, no, man, don't let me list it. Let me try and sell it for you because there's commission. So having a question and answer sheet like this and being able to answer all these questions with confidence because you know the answers, that's very important. But once you get it right, once you do your first one, you can do multiple properties.
I think we deserve a commission out of what you just said for the next deal they make.
Yeah, just ask Bruno. He can help you go there with you.
Okay, if guys, you're more than, I mean, you're like 100 guys. There's no way you don't have questions. Heron, I'm sure you paid school fees.
Yeah.
What went wrong?
Yeah, so one of the things is because the property still belongs technically to the seller, you're just paying it off and it will transfer into your name as soon as it's paid off. One of the mistakes that I made is I started to renovate one of the properties and I put in new tiles, made it nice, put the new front door, and I upgraded. I spent a little bit of money, but I knew I bought it for a cheap price. I spent a little bit of money, so now it's worth a lot. And then the seller phoned me and she said, hey, I see you making structural changes to my property. And I said, yeah, I put in a new front door. It looks really beautiful. And she said, okay, so I'm going to cancel the agreement because in our agreement, it states you are not allowed to make structural changes to the building without my written permission. And I got afraid because I thought, oh, no, I'm going to lose this property. And she was quite right. I had to get permission. So I had to smooth talk a little bit and explain, no, I did make a structural change. I mean, breaking out the door and putting in a nice big one. That's a structural change, but it actually improved your property value. And then I realized she's actually trying to cancel this because she also realizes the property is now worth more. She wants to get out of this deal so she can sell it for the 1.6, and the outstanding debt was only 1.32. So there was now a lot of equity in that property. And so she tried to get out of that deal. And I actually had to really bring out all my character to not end that agreement. So reading that installment sale agreement, once the attorney has drafted it, that's the rules. You must stick to that rules. That's if that thing says you must pay this much amount per month, then you must pay that amount per month. That's the agreement. Because if you fail to keep to that agreement, they can actually get the property back and sell it to someone else. And then you have just been the best tenant in the world. And you don't want to be the best tenant in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I only want to see that other characters that you're talking about. Bruno, There's a
Yes.
question here. I think you touched on it. Maybe you might want to just brief 10 seconds. What happens when the seller dies? Will the bank not call on the bond to be paid? How will the executor of the estate deal with the installment sale?
So look, there's different things that
Okay. Awkward. Yeah.
So that's absolutely right. So where there's bond amounts. So remember, when a property is about to get transferred, when a person passes away and a property is about to get transferred, especially whether it's to a heir or outside of the estate to somebody else in order to liquidate the estate, you will have to cancel that bond before transfer actually takes place. And by virtue of that cancellation, you need to settle the bond. Now, with installment sale agreements, the situation is slightly different because now bear in mind, yes, there's an estate. And a lot of times what we see is a lot of pressure by the executor to say, listen, we need to call up this bond right now. A lot of the times what you'll end up finding is a lot of the estates aren't actually liquid. So if there's no money in that estate at that moment, and there's only small payments coming in, you'll actually find that the estate is insolvent. And then that insolvency provision kicks in, which says that you as a purchaser need to accelerate your payments, pay the balance of the purchase price immediately in order to be able to proceed with your sale. Otherwise, you may find that the executor wants to sell the property off in order to cover the cost of the estate. Now, bear in mind from an investor perspective, this is a fairly big risk because it's exactly what Hiran pointed out. If you're going to someone that's in financial distress and you're basically just covering off their bond, more likely than not, you're looking at an estate that doesn't have enough assets to cover its liabilities, which by definition makes it insolvent. And when an estate is insolvent, you will be required to accelerate your payments in the installment sale agreement. Pay it as quickly as possible if you want the contract to proceed and if you want to take transfer of the property. At that juncture, that's normally when we suggest, if you do not have your own affordability, ideally what you'd want to do is you'd want to raise it within the network. So networks like this, for example, where you can approach people that do have affordability or have cash on hand that will look at the deal on paper, will see that it works, and they'll very easy JV with you and contribute for you to be able to proceed with the deal.
Yes, I like that. And that's why all our contact details are there. You're more than welcome to reach out.
Heron, I have a question, Shiliboy.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the instance where you are paying more than what is due on the bond and you've got and the seller has got some sort of an excess facility on it, how can you prevent the seller from accessing that equity through an excess facility from the bank? Because essentially it's still their bond.
Yes, okay, so I'm going to answer that in two parts. The first is part of the duties of the attorneys is they have to notify the bank that there's now an installment sale agreement endorsed against the title deed. And the bank, when they send out the statement, on the statement itself, they put there's a place where they put it. So it's on the electronic systems as well, registered. But even on the bank statement, you will see that there's written installment sale endorsement registered, no further advances, which means you cannot take money from that account. But your question was, what if if you buy a property this much and the outstanding bond is this much and you pay a little bit and they take that money? Now I want to share the secret for the evening. Think of we buy cars. We buy cars, buy cars low, and they sell it low again. So we as investors and everyone on this call, when you go and buy your property with an installment sale, why would you buy one where you pay 600 if the value is 600? Why would you not go and search for one where the value is 600, the outstanding debt is 400, and you offer 420,000? Then you make your money when you buy. You don't need bond approval. You can make that cash off or that offer of 420,000 now, and if they accept it, you actually buy yourself wealthy because you buy it at 420. It's worth 600, and you can immediately after 12 months, because an installment sale agreement must be for 12 months or more, So after 12 months, you can immediately sell it and take your 200,000 Rand profit. So in a time 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when I started this, I was happy to take it when the outstanding debt is 600, the value is 600, and the bond is 600, then I would buy it at 600 and make nothing, but at least there's some hope. But now, in this next years, I'm not buying a property at the market value. If the value is 600, I would look for properties where the outstanding debt is around 400, somewhere there, and then I would buy it at 450 or 460 or somewhere there. And then you buy it below value, because there's now so many of them available. People can't afford that bond repayment. So if you can go there and you can offer them just more than the outstanding debt, most likely people will take the deal, because they're so desperate for that 50 or 60 or 100,000 Rand. And that's where we as investors can end the Stokvel. When you put money in a Stokvel and you've got cash in that Stokvel, you can buy properties. You put 50,000 into the deal, the seller gets 50,000 out, he's happy, and the Stokvel then pays off the rest of the bond. And it's a brilliant way of buying properties.
When I'm
Yeah,
still
and I
hesitant-
believe on your website you also have opportunities for investors to actually have a look at the available deals that have been sourced by some of your students. So for those of maybe who are too busy to find our own deals, like Felicity was mentioning that it's hard, where do you find these people? So some of your students do actually find these opportunities. And so if you're interested in purchasing one of these agreements and doing an installment sale, you can just link up with them on your website. Is that correct?
I think I'm the new guy in this school, so nobody knows me really. So if they want to get in contact with me, if they can contact you, Celine Dile, I mean, then you can put them in contact with me, and I can help them. Yes, my mission is to buy quite a few, but in order to do that, there's that old saying: if you help enough people get what they want, you can have anything in life you want. And that's my moral of my story. The more people I can help to understand this, the more people will start to use this, the easier it will become for me and for you to buy more of these properties. Because most people out there only know one method, and that's getting a bond, buying it with a bank loan. And it worked in the old days when everyone could get bank loans, but right now and in the next couple of years, and for the most people in South Africa, including myself, I can't get bonds now. I use the installment sale method. I'm self-employed, so I work for myself, so it's difficult to get bonds. I can probably try, but why would I? I draw 4 circles on a paper and I buy a property. So I can draw 4 circles.
Hieron, just to add to what you were saying, just something interesting that I've come across very recently. Because of the economic climate, we're now at a point where we shouldn't even limit ourselves to exactly what you said. So you look for a 600 property, outstanding debt of 420, and you go in at 420. What we actually found now is some banks realize the risk of properties going up on auction. So we're actually not even just on installment sales, but normal sales. We're finding properties, we're making offers slightly below what's outstanding to the bank, and we're getting banks to agree to accept the lower offer. And banks are now entering into like acknowledgement of debts with the debtors saying, cool, you know what, you're short by 50K, but it's fine. Sign this acknowledgement of debt and we'll worry about the 50K afterwards. And interestingly enough, you sometimes find that the banks don't really worry about the 50K because there's a common pattern that properties going on auction sell for 20% less than market value. I find it actually a bit more, but let's say 20% less on a for sale value. If you go in with an offer that's within that margin of 20%, you may very well be able to convince the banks to accept your lower offer. So 600 property, 600 bond, offer of 550 or 560. It could actually work.
Okay.
Yes, no, 100%. If you think of all the options, if you understand this method well, and you now realize what is the need of the seller, this person that can't pay that bond anymore, and you realize how desperate that person can become within days of losing their job, realizing, oh, shocks, I can't pay. What must I do? And you can be the person arriving first at that property, giving them a solution that's not going to cost them anything. They can sign a few documents and they are out of that mess then you realize how valuable it is. It's not like you're going to beg them to sell their property to you. You are offering a solution, and the banks is also very keen on this, because like the example Bruno just mentioned, the bank will have to write off money. No bank likes to write off money. With us, they don't need to write off anything. So it's a win for the bank, it's a win for the seller, it's a win for us. And if everyone wins, why wouldn't we do this? Why?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I just need to take the last round of questions. I see Deborah the hand has been up. Deborah?
Hi everyone, how are you?
We're
Very
good.
good. Thank you, sir.
Good. It's quite an informative session. However, I just have a few questions that I have. That now, number one, I'm not a member of the Stokvel, if I may say. So now, there is a property that I've identified where the seller is willing to sell less than the market value. Now, how do I get the Stokvel to fund me on the property? Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think I already shared my details. You can just check on the chat box. You can get my details, then I can pass all the details to Slindile, Bruno, Heron, yeah, all the guys that are in our database, then they can assist you.
All right, thanks.
Sure. Cool. Okay, in closing, I think we pretty much ran out of time. Guys, the session was just, yeah, I learned a lot. I know I always learn a lot when I've got the three guys here. And I'm looking forward to the next sessions. And in closing, what would be your closing remarks, Bruno?
Sorry, I didn't get you there. Did you ask for closing remarks?
Yes, sorry, yes.
Look, I think we pretty much covered the benefits to such a degree that it's beyond question that putting a Stokvel together with an installment sale agreement strategy, going to market, not having to use that much of your money or very little of your money, having people backing you up with a level of finance, you're legally sound, you're protected for the most part. There's always risk in investments. I mean, you never make money unless you spend money or take some form of risk. So you can't expect all-out protection. But the protections offered for installment sale agreements are quite astounding. So it's legally safe, it's financially feasible, it doesn't need money out of your own pocket. I mean, sure, need I say more, I suppose.
Thank you so much, Bruno. It's always great to have you. I appreciate your support, and I hope you'll join us in the next sessions. Heron, what are your closing remarks, sir? You're muted, Heron.
Sorry.
It happens.
My closing remarks would be this. It is not only the wealthy that can buy a lot of property. You can do the exact same thing if you properly understand this method. And now is the best time ever to get this knowledge, to understand this, but because in the next 6 years, you can become a wealthy person if you invest in property. And the thing that you need to invest is not money. The thing that you need to invest is your time and knowledge. And if you want to join up with people like myself that's doing it right now, if you get in contact, I can help you to do your first one. Because if I can help you to do your first one, you can do a lot of them, and together we can also become one of those wealthy people.
I like that. Inclusive approach. We are preaching inclusive approach in order to fast forward the transformation within the property sector. I like that, Heron. Keep it going. Slee, Makuma.
So thank you everyone for such an informative session. I think for me, the key takeaway is there are a lot of people that have been previously marginalized from accessing property opportunities, you know, and something like an installment sale agreement is, you know, the leveler or the equalizer in a case like this, where the only thing that determines your growth and your property portfolio is really your hard work and grit and how much effort you put into it, you know. So your credit record doesn't matter, your affordability doesn't matter. It's only your availability to find and negotiate these deals that really affects that, you know. And I think, like I was saying earlier, that stokvels were formed because people were feeling marginalized, that they couldn't access property opportunities. But now this is an enabler for people to now actually be able to access property opportunities either by themselves or even grow a lot quicker if they're doing it as a group. So thank you so much, Ashili Boy, for organizing the session, and Heron for sharing your knowledge, as well as yourself, Bruno.
I mean, thank you so much for everyone who joined us. I really appreciate it. And for those who took polls, the results are up there. We know them and will analyze them and will probably communicate. I see those who have assets in their personal names. That's the biggest problem. I actually running an internal webinar around that, on how to do tax planning around that. If you are interested, please reach out to me. I shared my details in a chat box. That's a very, very important part. Don't have property portfolio in your personal name. Reach out to me, use the details there, and then be part of the webinars that I run. They're internal, they're not open for public. So, and then get to know how to move your properties away from your name, and so that you can preserve them for generation to generation. I see that this session was so oversubscribed. We might have to do this session again in the early hours. I mean, in the early times of next year, 2021. Don't blame me, Heron, it's Corona taking place. Even the minds are no longer functioning properly. So yeah, we might have to repeat this session next year, sometime maybe February, if the diaries allows, because the way it's so, I think we need it, especially given that the current the property market being declining and people being in a distressed position. We might have to learn this thing in more detail. And yeah, and Heron, I know you've got the course around that, and I know Slindy is also working on how to use Stokvel with the installment sales agreement. Maybe some of you guys might actually be first, founder members of that particular venture that is on the pipeline. Who knows? So you need to be closely with us, and so that you can know when these initiatives are coming up, and you take advantage of being the first bid. Yeah. With that said, thank you so much for joining me. I'll make the recording available to everyone. And if you don't get the recording links, please reach out to me. My details, I've shared them. And yeah, all the best. Be safe. Corona is still out there. Please follow the guidelines of the government, and you'll be safe and will be able to make that money. You need to be healthy and safe to be able to create wealth. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you.